Unlock the power of your mind. This is Provocative Enlightenment with Eldon Taylor.
Welcome and thank you for joining us today. The next hour is devoted to learning something more. Not just about the world of shoes and ships and sealing wax, but about how, what, and why we believe as we do. A time for the open-minded, willing to challenge some of those old ideas behind what we think we know, who we are, and who we might just become. I'm Eldon Taylor, and this is Provocative Enlightenment. All right, our chat room is open, and my partner Ravinder awaits you there now. You can log on by going to provocativeenlightenment.com/chat. We do have a great chat room, so Ravinder, tell us all about it, please.
We have the best chat room. It's a great group of people. They always bring their own insights into whatever it is that we're discussing on the air, so I can learn a great deal from them, and we have lots of fun too. So do come join us. That is provocativeenlightenment.com/chat.
Yeah, remember that / huh?
Of course.
In this week's Spotlight, I want to direct your attention to the nature of confusion. Believe it or not, there are actually several different forms of confusion. First, there is the obvious, the recognition that you are confused about something, perhaps even where you are or what you've been doing. We've all read or seen some story of the person who wakes up after a drinking binge in someone else's bed and knows not where they are or who they're with. This is a state of confusion one might think of as induced confusion. Most of us have experienced confusion over some subject, perhaps the message someone was sharing with us, or some new skill set we were attempting to learn, like calculus. So in this sense, confusion is a failure to understand. Then there is this state of ignorant confusion. I refer to this one again as ignorant confusion because we fail to be aware that we are confused. Indeed, we are quite certain that we have things right. As with cognitive dissonance, we are unable to witness our confusion due to our certainty that we are not confused at all. Perhaps an example or two may be helpful in clarifying what I have in mind. Let's take this simple situation. You were taught in school that at the time of Columbus, the world was believed to be flat. You may have repeated this story to your parents and or even your children. A flat earth implies that the idea of a circumference is an absolute non-starter. Okay, a friend informs you that 250 years thereabout before Christ, the circumference of the earth was calculated with amazing accuracy. BS, you insist. Obviously, if the earth was flat during the 1400s, no one calculated the circumference, and how could they possibly do that anyway? This makes no sense to you, so you are willing to argue this one with great vehemence. Now, the fact is, the story about a flat earth is a myth. Columbus knew well, as did everyone at that time with any scholarly learning, that the earth was round. As such, we have 2 points here. The first, why were you taught the earth was flat? Why were so many of us taught this nonsense? The second, you have now become aware of how easy it is to fall into the state of ignorant confusion. You thought you were informed, but you were not. You were confident in your knowledge, but ignorant of its fallaciousness. This is ignorant confusion, for you're simply unaware that you are confused. Now, I don't want to neglect the dissonance factor, for there are those who, from our example, know both that the earth was round, yet still teach the flat earth myth. You might ask how they manage this, and the answer is most interesting. While they possess both bits of information, they fail to integrate them and thereby remain ignorant of this dissonance. When asked, you hear answers such as, "Oh, I hadn't thought of that," or better yet, "Well, I thought the knowledge might have become lost." In other words, even when aware, there is an attempt to meld the two mutually exclusive ideas with some imaginary bridge. Now, why have I chosen this subject for today? The answer is simple. There is no limit to the allegations, untruths, half-truths, nonsense, and other dis and misinformation being distributed everywhere today. The fact is, I recently heard several news commentators lament the pure fact that even where they are concerned, there are no editors anymore. Editors play a big role in the dissemination of truth, for among their duties is fact-checking. So whether it's a post on some networking page or a line heard on the national news, it really is all subject to fact-checking today. I have heard arguments of all sorts throughout my life, some supposedly hard fact, like brain cells begin to die in your 30s and are unable to regenerate themselves, a statement that is completely false. It doesn't seem to matter whether it's hard science or political science, or everything in between. Before we take a hard, fast position on anything, we owe it to ourselves to ensure that we're not living in a state of ignorant confusion. My thoughts anyway. Your thoughts on this one, Ravinder?
Oh, I think this is a good one. It just tells you once again, you need to stop and think about what it is that you're thinking about and try and figure out how much is actually real and how much you've just picked up from everyone. The fact is, society doesn't teach us these days, or doesn't encourage us to think for ourselves. We're supposed to follow the crowd, we're supposed to follow the ideas, we're supposed to turn off that thinking ability because some expert out there has already done it for us. And the older I get, the more I realize there's no such thing as experts. So all I'd say is think and think again, and then think again about why you're thinking what you're thinking about. Yeah, and you have some chance then of discovering who you are and what your own thoughts are and what your own choices are in that process. We
might also, all of us, be advised to remember that we want to believe what we want to believe. Yeah. We tend to listen and tune into that which reinforces our opinions at any given point in time, and turn off to anything that challenges us. And in that very real sense, we deny ourselves the opportunity to truly be informed.
That we do. I actually make a conscious effort to do that. I will go out to view the other side of an argument. If someone's fanatical about the opposite side to me, I'll go out and check it out and try and figure out why they are so keen on their side. I try to find that other answer. Just a process I go through, that's all.
That's one of the things we do with our radio show. Okay, every week I read some of your letters as our way of involving you while paying respect to the very important role you play in making this show successful. Last week our guest was Professor Anders Ericsson, and we discussed his book, Peak, Secrets from the New Science of Expertise. Jamie wrote, "What a wonderful guest. I so loved your show." Richard wrote, "It's important to note regarding Anders' work how this pattern of focused, attentive, goal-oriented stretching applies universally to many areas of life. It is a meta-skill." Well said, Richard. Mary commented, "Dr. Taylor, you and Professor Ericsson are so right. Taking the arts out of school was a mistake." Now, we received several remarks regarding last week's spotlight on the binds of blame. CB wrote, "Thinking how powerful those 3 forgiveness statements are, I wonder if the converse is true in regards to original sin and other doctrines that encourage forgiving others. But the individual is a sinner who has to ask forgiveness from an entity whom very few hear replies from." Penji wrote, "When we blame, we can't accept." Moving on, Georgie wrote, "I have your ending self-destructive set. At first I listened every day for about 10 to 20 days, and then intermittently. Suddenly last week I had a huge insight that led to a massive life choice regarding a problem that has been with me since age 17. I feel certain this came about in part to the help and support provided by listening to this audio. I want to add that it was the newsletter description with ideas of how this title might work and how it might be applied to a particular type of situation that opened my eyes to the audio and to the idea of how and why I would use it. The result is exactly what I hoped for. Totally worth the investment, and thank you." All right, Ravinder, we did a couple of newsletters on self-sabotage. You write, more than half of those newsletters. So tell everybody how they can subscribe and begin to receive it free.
Yeah, it's very simple, actually. You can go to either eldentaylor.com or provocativeenlightenment.com. If you scan down the page just a little bit, you will see the big subscribe box right there. So right on the home pages of both provocativeenlightenment.com and eldentaylor.com.
Do subscribe. All right, that's all the time we're going to take for letters today, but I do invite you to opine by sending your comments to Eldon, that's ELDON, at eldentaylor.com, or by joining me on Facebook, and I want to thank all of you for your letters and comments. We truly do appreciate your feedback and support. Now to this week's show. We are our brains with Dick F. Swaab, M.D., Ph.D. So let me tell you a little about today's guest. Dr. Dick Swaab was director of the Netherlands Institute for Brain Research from 1978 to 2005. He is a professor of neurobiology at the University of Amsterdam. In 1985, he founded the Netherlands Brain Bank and was director until 2005. He is the leader of a research team, Neuropsychiatric Disorders, Netherlands Institute for Neuroscience, and Institute of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences. His major research interests focus on sexual differentiation of the human brain in relation to gender identity and sexual orientation, aging of the brain, Alzheimer's disease, and the neurobiological basis of depression and suicide. He has published over 560 papers in science journals, authored more than 200 chapters in books, and edited more than 60 books. He has also mentored 84 PhD students, 20 of which are now full professors. So on that, let's get him in here. Welcome to Provocative Enlightenment, Professor Dick Swaab.
Thank you very much.
It's indeed our pleasure to have you join us, sir. Your book covers the evolution of the brain from our basic drives to the more spiritual essence of who we think we are. So we have a lot to talk about. And where to begin was my first question after reviewing your material. I decided that we should begin at the beginning, that of consciousness itself. There are numerous theories regarding consciousness as existing independent of the brain, consciousness at a distance, if you will. What does your work tell us about consciousness, and what is your position on this idea that somehow there is the brain is a transceiver, like a radio, getting information from outside of the brain?
Well, consciousness is depending on brain activity, and especially on the interaction of a couple of brain areas like the prefrontal cortex and the thalamus. It's not true that we receive consciousness. The activity of the nerve cell produce consciousness, and you can get rid of consciousness by suppressing the activity of the nerve cell, like using anesthetics, for instance.
So, do I understand you to say that consciousness is brain dependent?
It's totally brain dependent.
Okay. So when you look at researchers that talk about near-death experiences or this field of parapsychology, ESP, or the work of someone like Rupert Sheldrake, who talks about dogs that know when their masters are coming home, Stuart Hameroff, who has identified some aspect of the brain, microtubules that are entertaining quantum information, bypassing that on. What do you say about this?
Well, interesting hypothesis, but no basis for it. And let's focus on near-death experiences.
Okay.
It's possible to induce near-death experiences when you stimulate the right part of the brain. So when the part of the brain is stimulated that is the border of the temporal and parietal cortex, then people on the table, on the operating table where they are conscious in such a brain exploration, they say, oh, my arms are becoming shorter, my legs are becoming shorter, I start to float. And they experience that they leave their own body. But that's just because the processing of that brain area is disturbed. And at the same, in the same way, you can show that the typical experience of a near-death period, the tunnel that is bright at the end can be induced by preventing the blood to flow to the eye. And then the periphery of the eye is suffering first. And that means you have a black periphery and a bright center. And that is the tunnel with, at the end, light. And so it's a near-death experience. It's a real experience. But it's a sign of malfunction of brain area, which can be induced in different ways.
Now, some might argue, Professor, that the pure fact that you can induce this does not necessarily negate the reality that there is such a thing as an NDE. People like to talk about, the classic cases of brain-dead patients who, have drowned and have, for all intent and purposes, been flatlined for several minutes. Do you think that...
Well, there are many uncontrolled stories about this. And some people hold the idea that they are really floating around, and quite a number of hospitals where people in bad condition are received have put on a very high place numbers and asked, what number did you see when you were floating there? Nobody can tell. So there's no proof whatsoever that it's more than disturbed brain action.
Okay, now, one of the theories that we've entertained on this show before links REM activity with NDEs. Are you familiar with that?
Well, you better tell me what was told there.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Please tell me what they told you then.
Oh,
because
well,
many stories about it.
Basically the research that I'm referring to found a correlation between REM activity and NDEs, suggesting that the NDE was but an altered brainwave state, dream state, if you will.
Yeah, well, in some aspects you can compare some of the symptoms with an altered dream state. And then it's still activity of the brain, so nothing special about it. But it's activity of the brain that is changed by a lack of oxygen or by enormous stress. And those two factors are the main inducers of near-death experience.
Okay, so your position, if I've got you right, is that NDEs, parapsychological phenomena per se, this is something that can be induced by the brain, has absolutely nothing to do with some spiritual component.
No.
Okay. No as in I've got it wrong, or no as in yes, you agree?
I totally agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
Data-driven information.
But I should say that the near-death experience is a real experience, and it's overwhelming for people that experience it. And they often become religious after such an experience. So the experience is real, but it's just brain activity, disturbed brain activity.
Okay. Now, one of the popular things that we hear a lot about today, especially when you deal with neurotheology, and we'll get into this more, is the notion of a God helmet. And I'm sure you're familiar with this one. Basically, the idea is that we can stimulate areas of the brain and we can produce deep religious experiences artificially.
Yeah.
True?
Yes, if first in early development the religious experiences are programmed into the brain, and then you can get it out with stimulation in the right way on the right place. So, but people that don't have this developmental programming in religion, they might have different experiences, not religious experiences. So you first should put something into the brain, and then you can get it out by stimulation.
Okay, now, that begs a question. If the brain is pre-wired, such that we can have these religious experiences, these parapsychological experiences, etc., and so forth, what on earth is the evolutionary purpose of that? I mean, some might argue that the reason it's wired that way is our Creator wanted us to be able to understand that there was a dimension beyond this one. How do you respond to that?
Well, I can't see any evidence for that. And we all want to have explanations for everything. And that's not possible, of course. And then it's very pleasant if you can point into the sky and tell that it's all coming from there. Everything that you can't explain is coming from there. And of course, if you look around, then the environment is so adapted that you can wonder how come, if you don't know anything about evolution, you are amazed about it. And it's easy to say, well, this has all been created by somebody who thought long about it. But my conclusion is that if there was really somebody who has created this Earth and the human beings on it, then he should have taken a little bit more time than that one day and would have done it better.
Paley's watch analogy, if we're walking along the beach and we find this beautiful pocket watch and we see that it, accurately counts time, and we open it up and we see how the gears and everything are all just so elaborately connected, we have to conclude there's a designer. And that's the propensity that you're suggesting we as human beings have. But then I think I missed, or you didn't answer, why we would have that evolutionary process in the brain. I mean, is that there just so we don't have to accept the fact that we're terminal? It gives us hope, or heals our psychology, or what?
It has many reasons, I think. It's, of course, it's pleasant against the fear of death. It's also giving a safe feeling that somebody is guiding you as long as you keep to the rules. And it gives an explanation for disaster, because God will punish people that don't keep to the rules. It has many aspects that make sense. Although, of course, there's no proof whatsoever for it.
I have to ask you on the personal side here. Now, clearly, if I'm to, take what you're saying, you're an atheist. Were you raised in a religious family?
No, my father was from origin Jewish, but not religious. My mother, Protestant, also not religious. So
the idea of there not being a creator was something that you were okay with as a youth?
Yes. But I was free to believe whatever I wanted. So if I would be convinced by, let's say, by school or environment, my parents would not go against it. So...
the next obvious question, Professor, is there anything that would convince you there was a creator? I mean, what would it take for you to say, okay, there's a creator? Because you're data-driven, that's obvious. You're a scientist.
Yeah.
What would it take?
Yeah, proof. Proof. I can tell you that I was religious when I was 8 years old or so, for a few weeks, because I found out that there were two families in the street who were Catholic, and they had many children, 8 and 7. And the rest of the street was not Catholic, and they had only 1 or 2 children. So I thought this was the proof of God. And, after a few weeks, my father told me about anti-conception and the problems of Catholics to use it, etc.
I see.
So I need proof, yes. From the beginning, I needed proof.
We have a hard break coming up. When we come back, I want to pursue with you other aspects of what you've uncovered in your 40 years of research in the evolution of the brain and how it impacts who we are. We're speaking with Professor Dick Swaab about his life and new book, We Are Our Brains, a neurobiography of the brain from the womb to Alzheimer's. It's a terrific read. I really suggest you take a look at this book. Okay, we have a video for you today featuring our guest making the point that homosexuality is predetermined before birth. So you will want to join Ravinder in the chat room and see this one. If you're listening on the dial, remember you can check the chat room out when you're next in front of the computer by going to provocativeenlightenment.com. Do stay tuned. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Provocative Enlightenment with Eldon Taylor.
Do you feel like you've become lost in a funhouse, only seeing the reflection of yourself, past, future, and present, but unable to find the real you? I invite you to step through the doorway and onto a pathway leading to understanding of your mind, your choices, and the influences that surround you. Read Eldon Taylor's New York Times bestselling book, Choices and Illusions. Now expanded, updated, and revised, it will provide you with real-life examples of how you can break free of your current perceptions and begin your journey to How High Is Up. Get your copy today from all bookstores or online from Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble.
Unlock the power of your mind. This is Provocative Enlightenment with Eldon Taylor.
Welcome back. If you just joined us, we're chatting with Professor Dick Swaab about his life and new book, We Are Our Brains. Now, we ask our guests for their favorite music that has some genuine significance to them. Music psychology is a new field of research with practical relevance in many areas, including investigations of human aptitude, skill, intelligence, creativity, personality, and social behavior. All right, we just played some of Mozart's Requiem in D minor. So please tell us, why is this music important to you, Professor, and how does it instruct us about who you are?
Well, it's for me, when I have a difficult period, a difficult day or so, I must say I feel much better when I hear this. And, of course, it was also composed for a most difficult period, the death of somebody. And to give some comfort. So I feel better when I hear it in a difficult period. That's the reason. And Mozart is, of course, having a lot of effects on our brain from the beginning onwards. To give you an example, if children that are born too early and they are too small for date are put into an intensive care unit, and they are exposed to Mozart, then the oxygenation of the blood is increasing, they are growing better, and they can go home earlier. And the interesting thing is that Bach doesn't have the same effect. So for Bach, you should be a little bit more mature.
That's really interesting. I hadn't heard that before. Now I understand that Mozart had perfect tone, and Bach didn't, but I'd never heard that association before.
Well, it has a rhythm that is also having a great impact on the brain. And, for instance, it is used also against epileptic activity in the brain. There are many effects of Mozart found on the function of the brain.
All right. While we're on that subject, you've worked with dementia patients, and there are a number of documented instances where patients suffering severe dementia, for all intent and purposes, so severe that they appear to be comatose. And yet when certain types of music that, have been important to them, has been important to them, was played, they would become fully lucid for a period of time, able in every way to communicate, remember, even sometimes get up and dance. What happens in the brain that turns active consciousness off and on like this?
Yeah, it's if you look in the brain during music, and especially music that is liked by those persons before, then you see that it's activating many areas of the brain. So, of course, it's starting with the circuits that are important for hearing, but then it's processed in many brain areas after that. It's going to the brain stem, it's going to our emotional centers, it's affecting the reward system, so you feel pleased when you hear music that you like. And it's even going to the motor cortex, so we can't sit still when we hear rhythmic music. And depending on the type of music, it's affecting more or less particular brain areas. So Mars music that is used in the military is activating heart rate, it's activating breathing. It's so you are made prepared for fighting by Mars music, and so it has a reason that the militaries use this.
That makes me think of the exaggerated marches that we see, from the Second World War and the German military. That exaggerated movement, does that somehow also emphasize or assist in building the aggression necessary for combat?
Well, I think this is part of bringing people so close together that they are going to act as one organism. And music can help, of course. A leader that is inspiring can help. A common enemy can help. Mars music is certainly also something that helps to bring people together into a group that acts as a group and not as individuals anymore, with all the dangers, of course, of that.
All right, that's very interesting. Okay, for our listening audience that's not near their computer, we kind of left them dangling before the break regarding homosexuality. They didn't have the opportunity to see the film. Tell us, how is it, on what basis have you come to the conclusion, a controversial conclusion, by the way, that homosexuality is predetermined in the brain?
Well, in the first place, by twin studies, you can determine the proportion of genetic background, and that's about 50%. Then you don't know the genes, but you know that the genetic component is 50%. And then there are effects of hormones like testosterone. There is an effect of the number of brothers that is born before you. The more brothers that are born before you, the more risk for or chance for homosexuality. And that's explained by the fact that if the mother is pregnant of a boy, the boy is producing proteins from the Y chromosome that the mother doesn't know. So those are strange proteins. And she acts as if it is a virus or a bacterium, making antibodies against it. And every pregnancy, again, this process is stimulated and interfering with sexual differentiation of the brain. So we know of the different compounds and components that cause sexual differentiation of the brain and give the variability from homosexuality to heterosexuality. And it's you can say that it is quite accepted that you cannot induce or change sexual orientation after birth. Now in America, for instance, it's forbidden for psychiatrists to be involved in trying to change homosexuality and heterosexuality. And one observation is very interesting in homosexual pairs that adopt children. The children are followed now for a long time, and they are doing very well. In psychological testing, they are doing better than the rest of the population, which is not so amazing because, of course, those parents were very much motivated to adopt those children. But what is interesting is that the chance for homosexuality is not increasing when the parents are both homosexual. So even if you have an excellent example from the very beginning onwards in the environment, there's no change after birth.
Which supports your idea of the nature of this being something that is a pre-birth conditioned situation. But now, have you done actually assembled data correlating large families where there are 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 boys and found that there is a positive correlation to support the theory?
Those studies have been done. There are about 5 extensive studies about this, and that broader effect has been shown again and again. So in those large families, you see an increased chance of homosexuality. But that's just one of the mechanisms involved.
So this basically becomes just a fact, then, at least based on the fact that you understand what the mechanism is, and it is supported by way of going out into the world and actually observing that indeed that takes place in the larger families with more boys.
Yeah. And then, of course, we have found differences in brains of homosexual and heterosexual men, which also indicate that early in development there is a different developmental process going on.
What difference did you see in the brains?
Oh, there are many differences now reported. It started with a difference we reported in the hypothalamus, and after that also in America, hypothalamic area. The hypothalamus is very important for sexual behavior. And so we started to look there. But after that, there are also findings in other parts of the brain. So the brain differences are such that they can only develop early in development before birth.
And this correspondence was in a respectable sample size.
Yes, and published in respectable journals. Yes.
Why is the issue so controversial then? I mean, it's controversial even with gays. I mean, if the data says this...
Well, in some cases, I think not in most cases, because, there is a kind of remnant from the 60s and 70s, which gives some people the idea that they have chosen to become homosexual. And the choice is called a political choice, or was called a political choice. And when I said this choice has been made for you in the womb, and I cannot see the political part of it, a lot of people became angry. But I think it's now well accepted that it's an early developmental process, which is part of the variability. We are all different in all aspects, also in our sexual orientation. And it goes from heterosexual to homosexual, bisexuality in between. And we are just put somewhere on this axis early in development, before birth.
How does this work with transgenders then, Professor?
Yeah. It's in fact a similar story, although gender identity and sexual orientation are two different processes, independent processes. But gender identity is also determined before birth. It's determined by testosterone that is made by the boy in the second half of pregnancy, and influencing brain development in such a way that in puberty or even earlier, children are feeling that they are male, that they are a boy. And if testosterone is not produced in the second half of pregnancy, then the brain is developing in female direction. But again, there is variability in all the processes involved. And since our sex organs are developing in the first 2 months of pregnancy, and the brain is sexually differentiating in the second half of pregnancy, those two processes can be influenced in a differential way. And that means that you can expect, in this sense, female structures in male brains, in transsexuals, and the other way around. And that's what we also found. So sexual differentiation of the brain is reversed in transsexual. And the changes we find in the brain are in agreement with how people see their own gender identity. And they are not in agreement with the birth certificate and the passport. So that's the problem.
Let me ask you this. Not long ago, the president of Harvard was asked to resign over making statements about the differences in male and female brains. He actually made a statement that the female wasn't as good at math and science because of anatomical differences, brain differences, whether they were genetic or environmental, You distinguish differences between male and female brains. Are those differences, do they impact learning ability? Flesh that out for us, please.
Well, they certainly impact interest. So females have, let's say, more interest in professions where care is involved. Males are more interested in technical things. But of course there is overlap again. So this is true for the groups as such, but there is overlap between the groups. There's variability again in interest also. Mm-hmm. Women are better in language. And if you look to translators, it's a female profession. And that's not only true in the West, but also in China, where I also work. And those men who are professional interpreters are, for a high percentage, homosexual. So there's also a relation to that. So it's, you should, you only feel fine when you find a profession that fits with the way the brain has developed.
So it's based on interest. Well, okay, now, here's something I've been involved in, the research and writing about. But, utilizing fMRI, watching the brain lifetime, a technician will know what decision you're going to make when we give you choices, A, B, C, D kind of thing. 6 seconds or so, on average, before you consciously know what your decision's going to be.
Right.
Okay, now, that kind of, suggests that there is, an operation going on that remediates the idea of free will. What's your take on free will?
Well, I think it's a very pleasant illusion, free will.
Say that one again.
It is a pleasant illusion.
That's what I thought you said, a pleasant illusion.
So, I also have the idea that I make conscious decisions continuously in a logical way. But if you test this in a laboratory, you can see that the decision is made in the right part of the brain and becomes only conscious indeed between half a second and 7 seconds later. And then the left part of the brain is making a logical story about it, which is sometimes true and sometimes not true. And the judge who has to investigate a story of a witness knows this, that you can't trust witnesses. It's not because they lie, but because they make a nice story out of parts of information that seems to be logical, but it doesn't necessarily has to be logical.
Right. And sometimes the defense mechanisms are such that they remain hidden. It's just a BS story. It's a rationalization. Let me ask you this then. Let's go to criminality. We have, we're acting out of our unconscious. And, part of this is genetic and part of it is perhaps hereditary, or not hereditary, but environmental, nature, nurture kind of context. When we look at criminality and understand that they're not making the kind of conscious decision that we typically want to hold someone culpable for, that this is really a program coming out of their unconscious, how should our jurisprudence system treat that?
Well, some people say that if free will doesn't exist, you cannot punish people. But I think that's the wrong conclusion. Because we are social animals. And society can only function when we keep to the rules. And even if you make an unconscious decision that is wrong, it should be made clear to you that this was a wrong decision, and the next time we hope that the punishment will give some information that remains in the brain and will be calculated in an unconscious way the next time in order to reduce the chance to repeat the criminal act. So because we are social animals, we should make clear to people that we can't accept that they don't keep to the rules. But the big question then is how can we best punish people? And I think that we have to learn a lot about that because there is no evidence-based punishment in this world. So there were no controlled experiments done on the question how can we best punish people such that you can prevent it to happen the next time. And then there is a big problem when you look into prison, and that doesn't hold only in the Netherlands, but certainly also in the United States. Some 90% of the prisoners have psychiatric problems. They are patients, and they are punished, but they are not treated, or they are not well treated.
Right.
So this is another problem that because of the psychiatric problems, they are prone to make a mistake and get into problems with justice. And the question is, can we deal with that in a different way? So it's really a big problem. But I don't think that free will is important here because even people who are dealing with this type of criminality think that the law is based upon free will. I think the law is based upon the fact that we are social animals, and we cannot accept that people make problems for society.
Another one of the illusions that we live under. I have worked with incarcerated environments, and I think the only thing you can do there is a form of cognitive engineering. You have to basically change that biocomputer so that what comes from the unconscious, the right hemisphere, gives them a different decision.
Changed by learning, of course. If you can learn, so you can next time make a different decision in an unconscious way.
Professor, we have about 30 seconds left, and in that 30 seconds, I really want you to be sure and let our audience know where they can get your book and how they can learn more about you.
Well, there is a Penguin Pocket in English, so that's easy to obtain.
All right.
And then I'm just in the end phase of writing another book. It will come out in the Netherlands, Our Creative Brain. That is the second popular book about the brain in relation to art and music, etc. But
give me a copy,
for the time
would you?
Being in Dutch.
We're out of time, sir, and I could take another couple of hours asking you the questions that I have here. Maybe we can get you back. The book, We Are Our Brains, a neurobiography of the brain from the womb to Alzheimer's. I urge you to give this one a read. Well, we've come to the end of another episode of Provocative Enlightenment. I want to thank our guest and all of you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed our show and will join us again next week, same time and same place. And do tell your friends. Until then, remember, believing in yourself always matters.
Provocative Enlightenment has been brought to you by Progressive Awareness Research and other sponsors. Provocative Enlightenment is a syndicated show and appears on other networks. For a schedule of show times, visit provocativeenlightenment.com. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor, write to Eldon at eldontaylor.com.